Hello and welcome. It's the top of the world, bordering 5 countries. So who owns the Arctic? The pressure is growing as global climate change at the North Pole is opening up new possibilities for commercial interests, and national military command bases are springing up, as well as the ice is melting. A treasure trove of mineral resources is currently locked underneath the snow, including huge oil and gas reserves, all becoming easier to extract as the ice recedes. Multinational shipping companies are also eagerly eyeing the fabled Northwest Passage over the North Pole as a profitable future trade route when the waters stay ice-free for a couple of months, which could happen within the next 15 years. Hand in hand with increasing commercial interest comes the growing national political ambitions of the countries bordering the Arctic Sea: Russia, Norway, Canada, the US and Denmark via its autonomous territory Greenland. But what about the indigenous native populations living above the Arctic Circle? Will they also have a seat at the table of international power brokers who are determined to claim the lands around the North Pole? And who will be responsible for maintaining the Arctic's pristine environment? Today we look at the growing militarization in the region and ask who should control the mineral resources and shipping interests in the Arctic region. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part, and we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me today from Berlin is Christoph Seidler, an editor for the online edition of Der Spiegel magazine, who's written extensively on the geopolitics of the Arctic region. He's the author of the German language book Arctic Shares Monopoly, or Arctic Monopoly in English. A Korean language edition will be out soon too. And on from Amsterdam we have Geert Leipold, Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Before assuming leadership there, Dr. Leipold organized its nuclear disarmament activities and once flew in a balloon over the former Berlin Wall to protest against nuclear proliferation. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Christoph, if I could start with you there and ask, why does it seem the Arctic is suddenly so strategic?
Well, actually, the Arctic has been strategic some time ago. We just have to think back to the times of the Cold War. But after that, that situation changed for a while, and it's only recently that the Arctic has come back into global political focus, and that's, of course, because of the melting ice cap in the Arctic.
Now, it seems that the race to take control of the region is recent, as we're saying here now. But why has it taken us, why has it taken so long for an interest to develop in this part of the world in the way that it's developing now? The way the race seems to be on. The race seems to be a lot hotter now, so to speak.
I mean, a crucial fact for the race was, of course, something that happened in the summer of 2007. That was a Russian dive at the precise location of the North Pole, where two Russian mini submarines were diving to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, 4 kilometers beneath the ice, and they installed a Russian flag there. That had no legal significance, but in any case, that was the moment when the world noticed that the Arctic and the adjacent region is back on the geopolitical map again.
Dr. Geert Leipold, good to have you with us as well. And if I could ask you, from what you know, how extensive are the resources up there? Are the reports that 1/3 of the planet's crude oil could be under the seabed there? Are those reports credible in your opinion?
Well, I'm not necessarily an expert of how many resources they are, but certainly I would say that Greenpeace is an expert what happens if we burn even more of these resources, especially the oil resources. And in that the Arctic has become of strategic importance, I think is absolutely correct and should be, but maybe we should think differently of what strategy means nowadays in the world. The Arctic is the best example of where we already see climate effects on one hand, with melting glaciers, with warming sea ice, etc. But at the same time, if climate change accelerates further, this could even be a driver through a recession of glaciers, through a surface that is less white and therefore can reflect less of the sunshine. So I think this is an enormously significant area of the world for everyone to look at, even if it's very, very sparsely populated.
Well, Dr. Leipold, looking at the countries that are lining up to take some control there, what's your worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen in this race for control?
Well, I think it's a dangerous combination of factors. The chase for more mineral resources, especially for oil, the fact that there are already military interests, the fact that very powerful nations are bordering there, all could combine to a very, very dangerous cocktail. Now, I think the best scenario we could imagine is that we take the lesson from this area, that we take the lesson of early signs of climate change and look at the Arctic as an area of cooperation and as an area which the whole world takes care of in the interest of our common future.
Christoph, if I could ask you, you know, how much, from what you know, how much attention is being paid to the potential environmental damage as the bid for mineral resources and bid for sort of political control of the region takes place?
That's actually quite hard to say because, I mean, obviously on paper everybody and all the polar nations in particular will of course say yes, we do care and yes, we pay attention. On the other hand, if those statistics that are on the table and that you already quoted about the 25% of the world's undiscovered oil and gas resources being in the Arctic, if these statistics are more or less true, it means that there is going to be an exploitation of at least some of these resources, and for the moment, the capability to respond to any significant oil spills in the high Arctic is more or less zero. I mean, we all know the pictures from the Exxon Valdez catastrophe more than 20 years ago, and actually that was where the world learned how dangerous actually oil activities in the Arctic can be. And as I said, there is not much oil spill response capability so far. So even if the polar states say, yes, we do care about what happens with the environment, still, given the fact that there will be oil exploitation, they desperately need to build up oil spill response capabilities.
Now, Christoph, the term Arctic power, referring to those 5 countries vying for control, the term Arctic power comes up a lot now in articles and so on. What I mean, beyond that sort of access to minerals and so on, what do you see as the benefit of being an Arctic power?
Well, actually, I don't know if that's a category that makes really sense. Like these countries have been Arctic states for some time, and actually they also have a tradition of being Arctic states for a very long time. I mean, if we talk, for example, about Russia and the Russian dive at the pole, we tend to forget that the Russian people have been active in the Arctic for quite a long time. And it's the same for the Inuits in Greenland. It's the same for the indigenous populations in Canada, and so on and so on. So that means it is a fact. Right. There is human activity in the Arctic. There is people living there, and those governments, of course, have to take care of their people. In particular, and of the interests of mankind in general. I mean, Dr. Leipold has mentioned that the Arctic is the place where climate change hits the most, right. And the Arctic countries do see the effects.
I was thinking, Christoph, you talked about the U.S. being a little bit on the sideline when it comes to you know, the race to take control, and that you believe that Washington maybe, if Washington is sort of missing in the equation, it's also missing as a stabilizing factor. I was wondering, in that sense, an Arctic power.
I mean, what's pretty crucial when we are talking about the geopolitics of the Arctic now is that Arctic states may claim territories on the sea floor in the Arctic if they have signed the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. And all polar states have done that except for the US. The US has not ratified that convention, so that means the US cannot claim territories. The US is thus not always very interested in Arctic issues, and that means that it will not be able to, calm down a potential military buildup that is going to happen there in the future.
Okay. Dr. Leipold, we had a question that came in, or comment came in from a viewer by the name of Muhammad Ali, who sent it through our Facebook site, who says, the Arctic is just an ice park floating in the Arctic Ocean. Russia owns the Arctic seabed. Now, of course, we discussed that mission that Russia had a short while back. Do you feel it makes any difference, really, who has, which country has the strongest claim or presence there?
Well, I think it makes a big difference, and if we look at the other big Arctic region, the Antarctic, then I think as a world we have a good example how we can deal with these delicate and globally important areas, which through the Antarctic Treaty, which basically declared it a world park, which meant that no mineral exploitation takes place and that the area is demilitarized. So I think that if we look at this region as an opportunity for peace and as an opportunity to, instead of fueling climate change, as an area where we counteract climate change, I think we make a much better approach to it.
Well, Dr. Leipold, we had a question from our live station chat room. People are online chatting now as we talk, and a person in the live station chat room by the name of Gandhi here in the US says, what is the UN doing to solve territorial disputes and looming ecological disaster in the Arctic?
I don't think the UN plays a big role so far in the Arctic, and because of the territorial claims that do exist. We did have in the past quite a number of very good scientific work being done. For example, already 5 years ago, a big international study was done on the impact of climate change on the Arctic, and I think if the study were done today, we would unfortunately have discovered that the effects have moved much more forward. So what I would think that in the Copenhagen conference, for example, the issue of the Arctic, the issue, for example, of what should happen there if there is no exploitation, which I think ecologically makes sense and in terms of peace makes sense, what kind of compensation should be happening under a Copenhagen Treaty?
Okay, well, we're going to take a very short break here and continue our discussion. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging onto livestation.com and entering the chat room. We're also launching a snap poll in our live station chat room asking who owns the Arctic. We'll have results for you. Check that out, and more of our discussion when we return. Stay tuned.